Excellent. Okay, thank you and welcome to today's session for SSDT tools and features for SQL Server DevOps. First of all, a few words about myself. My name is Eitan Blumin. I'm a senior SQL Server consultant at Madeira Data Solutions, which is the leading consulting company in Israel, specifically for the Microsoft Data Platform. You can find me on my own website, which I have, where I periodically publish posts on my blog about SQL Server, specifically in the Microsoft Data Platform in general. I also co-host the SQL Server Radio podcast together with Guy Glanzer, the CEO of Madeira Data Solutions. You can also find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and probably Facebook if you look hard enough. I'm in Azure, I have Azure certifications, MCSC, MCSA, and all the new ones. And as Kevin said, I'm also Microsoft Data Platform MVP. So today's session, as I said, SQL Server SSDT, which basically means SQL Server Data Tools, tools and features for SQL Server DevOps. First, what is this specific session about, and who is it for? But sorry, actually, I'm supposed to explain here. Right. So first of all, this specific session is actually the third, okay, número tres, from a series of sessions. If you haven't yet watched the previous two sessions, I strongly recommend that you do, because I rely on, I count on it that you would have the basics necessary for it. If you haven't yet, you can go to my website, eitanblumin.com, and go here to presentations and CI and CD with SSDT, and you will find here a page for each one of the sessions in the series. Part one is development lifecycle basics for DBAs, where we get through the basic terminologies of the world in general of DevOps and source control and all of that. Part two is SSDT methodologies for DB DevOps. I explain at a high level of how one is supposed to work with SSDT in terms of methodologies, okay, and how deployment works, and so on. And today's session is about the specific tools and features, essentially like the set of tools that we have in SQL Server, in SSDT, for implementing DevOps for SQL Server databases. It will be hopefully demo heavy if everything works okay. And it basically will be sort of like a tour of the tool set, the environment, and so on. Let me go like this. Right. So first, a few words about SSDT. I already talked about it in previous sessions, in the previous part, but I'll go over it really quickly. SSDT in general, first of all, it's a free tool for Microsoft, entirely free. Available also for the free edition of Visual Studio. It's basically a set of tools and project types for Microsoft Visual Studio. There are also variants of it for VS Code and Azure Data Studio, but the most advanced variant, if you can call that, is for Visual Studio. It is essentially a combination of extensions and add-ons in Visual Studio. The main one of which is the SQL Database Project. That's basically the main feature, the main tool that we will be talking about here. Under this headline, this title of SSDT, SQL Server Data Tools, it also includes the BI project types, SQL Server reporting services, integration services, and analysis services. But those nowadays are installed completely separately as separate extensions in Visual Studio. And we will not be covering them today in today's session. The set of tools, additional set of tools that come in together with SSDT also include schema and data compare, just like in Redgate. It all contains a refactoring tool, which allows you to make change, like project-wide changes very easily. We'll show that a bit later. And it also a new project type specifically for SQL database unit testing. The way to deploy it, and this slide is what you would need to know how to automate, basically, the deployment of the build and deployment of SSDT projects. So to build an SSDT project, you use the standard MS build executable. The result of that build would be the project artifact, which is a DACPAC file. And that's what you would see show up in the bin folder once you build the project. You will be taking this DACPAC file and deploy it using either the SQL package.exe command line utility, or you will be using PowerShell and either the DAC services module or library, or the DBA tools, what's it called? The module, the DBA tools module, which is free and open source. The unit test project type in SSDT is basically a wrapper for a very standard MS test project. And you would be deploying it using standard mstest.exe or vstest console.exe executable. So this slide is basically what you would need to know, the important things to know for automating build and deployment of SSDT. To install SSDT, you would need to install the data storage and processing workload in Visual Studio. Assuming that you have already Visual Studio installed, you go to Tools, Get Tools and Features. You would see a screen something like this. Scroll a bit downward. You would see data storage and processing. And once you select it, one of the items in the list will be SQL Server Data Tools, right? And that will include what we are talking about today. The basic concepts of working with SSDT, I'm going to have like a very short recap. I'm not going to go deeply into either of these because this slide is basically what I covered in part 2. Okay, so you haven't seen that yet, please do. So each project in SSDT represents a single database. Okay, that's one main concept. It is possible to split a database into multiple projects. Okay, and you can have multiple projects. Each project belongs to a different database, and they could have like dependencies in between them. Each object in the database would be one SQL script file, hopefully. Not necessarily, but hopefully. More specifically, each object has to be in its own batch in the Visual Studio project, which means separated by the Go keyword. So theoretically, you could place all of your objects in one script file and have each object separated by the Go keyword, but it will be very difficult to work with in terms of source control, right? So the more your objects are split into separate SQL script files, it will be easier to handle in terms of source control and version history and merge conflict resolutions when you're working with source control and branching and so on. What you save in an SSDT project is essentially schema only without the data. Data is not considered part of your project. There are ways to sort of like circumvented by using something called post-deployment script, which is basically just a SQL script, T-SQL script, which is completely free form, and it is executed automatically at the end of a deployment of the phase which applies the changes of between the DACPAC file and your target database, and then at the end the post-deployment script runs, and whatever you put in there happens. As I said, the deployment artifact is a DACPAC file. During design time, there is also a compiler service running in the background, which allows you to highlight errors and syntax errors and so on, and reference errors during design time, even without building the project. Okay, there's many use cases where this can be very useful. And there's also support for SQL CMD variables, which can be used during the deployment phase for all kinds of dynamic behavior. And the script itself, which during deployment is generated and applied to the target database, is a SQL CMD format script, basically. Okay, so without further ado, let's go into the actual demo, and I'm going to show you an example project. Okay, let's see. You know what? Let's start with a new project. So assuming that you have SSDT installed, as I showed in the slide, when you create a new project, you can look for SQL database. Yeah, sure. SQL Server Database Project. That's the SSDT project type, basically. And we can decide where to save it. Doesn't matter where at this point. Let's call it database 1. When you first do so, the project that you create is empty, as you can see. But assuming that you already have an existing live database, you can very easily fill this project with the objects that you have from the actual database that you already have. So to do so, you right-click on the project name, select import and database. As you can see, there are also a couple more options here. You can import from a DACPAC file, or you can import from a SQL script that contains a list of objects. Right now, let's go with database, because that's usually the most common one. And let's say, I don't know, let's go with this one, I guess, or this one. So as you can see, you first start with selecting a connection. You select which database you're connecting to. And let's see, there are all kinds of options here. I'm not going to go too deeply into the details here, but usually I recommend going for this one, import database settings, because usually you have database level settings that a lot of people miss, like the recovery model, the compatibility level. Sometimes these things are important, and if you don't take this into consideration during development and deployment, all kinds of unexpected behavior could happen. So I recommend using that as well. In this dropdown here, you can select choose for Visual Studio how you would want to have your folder structure created. Either everything created within one folder, or each folder is per schema, like DBO, whatever other schemas you may have, or per schema object, like tables, store procedures, functions, and so on, or a combination of the two, DBO and whatever, and underneath, inside the schema subfolder, you would have subfolders per object type. So let's go with this simple example. Once you select you click on Start, then the Visual Studio will start importing all of the objects in your database schema. Depending on how many objects you have in your database, this could take a while. Also depending on network latency, I guess, processing power. And so on. Thank you. Meanwhile, let's see what else. Yeah. This should take a few more seconds. And once it completes, you'll see the new folder structure appears at the right there. There you go. Finished. Thank you very much. All right. So as you can see, there's the folder structure here based on, first of all, the schema and then the object types. Okay, you can see all the stored procedure, tables, and so on. There are also some server level objects that are created, such as users and logins, some service broker objects, some file groups, maybe file groups, partition functions and partition schemes. This is another schema that I have. Extended properties even are supported. And you can obviously change all of these as you see fit and basically start developing, right? About developing, perhaps basically it's something that I talk about in the previous in part two, in the part two session, but methodologies. But I'm going to stress it again here because a lot of people miss it. The main methodology when working with SSDT basically means offline development. All right. It's supposed to be exactly comparable to how software development would be happening, where a software development will be using Visual Studio essentially to write the code, right, and build it. And then as a result of the build, you would have like perhaps DLL files or maybe some kind of installation files. And those files would need to be deployed to some kind of testing environment, let's say. And so before you do, the development is basically offline, right? And if you want to debug it, you debug it locally, at least initially, right? So the idea here is the same. You're supposed, when we're working with SSDT, you're supposed to develop your database locally in Visual Studio. And then if you want to do like some kind of basic test, you could build your project locally. You could, once it does, you could, okay. And it might be missing. Once the build completes successfully, you would publish it. I'm going to show it again. Sorry, I think I did it too fast. Right click on the project and select publish, right? So publish basically does the same as build to create the DECPAC file, and then you give it a target, such as your local instance, for example, to deploy it there, to deploy the DECPAC through your local instance. So you would select the local connection, click OK, and then you can click on publish, and all of the changes, whichever they are, will be applied to your local database, and you will be able to test it locally. Speaking of testing and connecting to a database, here is a very important feature of SSDT. Here's a very important feature of SSDT, which is basically, did you know that inside SSDT, I'm going to answer that question shortly. Inside SSDT, you basically have something like a mini SSMS, essentially. What do I mean by that? If you go to View and then SQL Server Object Explorer, this one, you would see a SQL Server Object Explorer, the same one, essentially, almost the same one that you would be seeing in SSMS. Check it out. It's very, very similar. There are basically what you have here is the bare minimum required for a database developer. Okay, for a database developer. Where are all the tables? There they are. Thank you. And why is there an X here? That's weird. Okay. Let's take this, for example. I think. Or maybe this one. Oh, no. Okay, there you go. There's some latency. I apologize. So as you can see, I can like query from tables here. I can write queries. New query. There you go. New query. Okay, and this is again very, very similar to SSMS. I can write queries here. One thing, important thing to remember here, the shortcuts, the keyboard shortcuts are very different. Okay, many of them are very different here. For example, F5 does not execute a query. F5 is a different shortcut specific to Visual Studio, which basically debugs the project or builds the project. So the shortcuts here are different. For example, to execute, it's Control-Shift-E. Okay, not very easy to remember at first. It's quite different, but it's not too vastly different because it's kind of similar to Control-E. But you also have an SSMS. You can also view an actual execution plan. I mean, there's no execution plan here, but I mean, not that interesting. But yeah. So what I'm trying to say with this is that SQL database developers don't really have to use two separate tools, like developing in Visual Studio and then going off to SSMS to connect to a database and test things. You don't really have to do that. You can do that from within Visual Studio, okay? You have all the minimum things that you need to run queries, to run SQL commands, to examine the objects inside your database. It's all here, okay? The things that you don't have here are things that are not relevant to development, such as administration, management, security, and so on. Those are not as actual security. I think there is at some level here. But everything having to do with administration, management, and SQL agent jobs and so on, those are not available here in this Object Explorer. Okay, so let's say Josh asks, unfortunately, my huge database has hundreds of errors that doesn't allow me to build. I know, Joe. I know, Josh. You have to resolve those errors. Usually, those errors are reference errors because you have either broken code or you have dependencies between databases. And you have to add references to those databases in order for the build to succeed. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to go into detail here on this topic of basically troubleshooting errors in SSDT, but luckily for you, I do have also a part 4 of this series of sessions called Troubleshooting Common SSDT Errors. And there are a few recordings of this where I deliver these sessions at a few spots. So you can feel free, enter my website and look for this one, and I'm sure you'll find the answer there. Right, so back to our thing here. Let's see, what topic do I have to cover? Right, database references. I mentioned database references, And let's see. Oh, come on, stuck now. Don't be stuck. Thank you. Okay. As I said previously, most errors most build errors in SSDT have to do with reference errors. Let's say, for example, let's go to some kind of stop procedure. Let's say, yeah, this is a good example. Okay, I have a stop procedure here, for example. Yeah, there will be recording, don't worry. Let's say I have a store procedure which is dependent on system objects, right? Sys dot something, whatever. Okay, this is a reference error. If I highlight over this, as you can see, there's an error that says this thing has an unresolved reference to object sys partition parameters in this case. Okay, that's because I am missing a database reference. Which database reference? The system database reference, which is master, because that's where all of these system objects are coming from. So if I want to resolve these specific errors, where I have dependencies on system objects, I go like this. I go to the references part here, below the project, right? This one. I right-click on it, and I click Add Database Reference. All right. Once I do, I'm presented with this dialog box here. And as you can see, we have a few interesting options here. We have different options of where is the database that I want to reference. Is it a different project in the same solution? I can have multiple database projects in the same solution, and they can have references to each other. Is it a system database? In this case, yes, I'll select it shortly. Or is it a DACPAC file that could bring from somewhere else, and that will be my reference? That is also possible. So in this case, I'm going to select system database master, right? And let's say we have database location here, which says that this database, this reference database, it is a different database from the current database represented by the project, but it's on the same server. Okay, and this is its name, and this is how you would reference tables, objects inside this database. Very simple. Okay, I can click on OK. I can also, by the way, select this one, this checkbox here, which says suppress errors caused by unresolved references in the reference project. This is useful for when you might have a version drift between your project and the other database that you would have dependencies on, reference to. And you wouldn't want this to stop you, basically. So you would be marking this checkbox to basically suppress if whatever your references exists in this referenced database, then even if it doesn't exactly fit the structure, maybe the columns are different, stuff like that. Yes, thank you. Then those errors will be suppressed by this checkbox. Okay, so I'm going to click OK, and very shortly you will see that all of these reference errors will simply disappear. Maybe now, maybe give me a few seconds. Maybe I need to build. Let's try building the project and then see that it disappears. Unless something else breaks the build. That will be interesting. Oh, actually, I think I already built this project successfully, right? Previously. Okay, while this is happening, I gave an example here for adding reference to a system database, right? The same thing, as I said, you can also add reference to user databases. Oh, what happened here? That's interesting. Okay, that's weird. Oh, I think you completed. Yeah, the build succeeded, and as you can see now that I don't have the errors here any longer. Cool. So similarly, if I have dependency on an object which is in another database, then I could resolve it similarly. Let me think where I have an example. I don't recall. No, that's not it. Let's say, yeah, I'm not gonna go too deeply into this. It's gonna take too long. But yeah, basically, as I said, I can have added a reference to another project in the same solution, if there is one, obviously. And this thing is important. There are 3 different levels of reference. I could have like another project, another SSDT project within the same solution and have reference to it, but it doesn't have to necessarily represent a different database in the same server. It could also represent a different database on a different server. And then in order to access it, you would be referring to it in a 4-part name using the linked server. Or you could have it also within the same database, which basically means that you are able to split your one database into multiple projects. Each project will have a different set of objects, right? But and they could have dependencies on each other, but the build would still succeed, and you would not have reference errors because you would have this reference added as telling Visual Studio that this is to basically treat objects in that project as if they are within the same database as the current project. Okay, so if we do, let's take this just as an example. Okay, right. I just writing it to have something written down here. Okay, so for example, if it's a different server, different database, different server, I would be telling it what is that server name. I could also use a SQL CMD variable, and then it will look like this. And then during deployment, I could have control over it. During deployment, I can provide values for SQL CMD variables such as this, and perhaps these values are different between environments, right? Maybe in one instance, a reference database has one name. In a different environment, it has a different name. Or maybe it's like some kind of a multi-tenancy model. Maybe I have a linked server with different names in different environments, and I can have control over this using SQL CMD variables. And if I select same database, then as you can see, both of these things disappear, they gray out, and then to refer to objects within that imaginative DACPAC file, in this case, I would simply refer to the object without any 3-part name or 4-part name, as if it's in the same database. Okay, next, let's go. I want to open the previous, let's see, the previous project that I had here. There it is. Okay, so this is an example project from Microsoft called Wide World Importers. It has a set of all kinds of different varying object types and all kinds of interesting components here that basically showcase the various capabilities of SSDT and SQL Server. I recommend using it as a testing bed, right? To play around with if this is your first time working with SSDT. I think somewhere here I have a CLR procedure, but I don't recall. You know what? I'm not going to bother with it. I'm going to add it. Okay. So what I want to talk about is the fact that besides SQL objects, the classic SQL objects such as tables, procedures, and so on, you could also, within the same project type, SSDT, SQL Database Project, you could also have CLR objects. So if I add a new item here, and then I will search for CLR, I also have it here. Right, this is easier. We have CLR aggregate, CLR store procedure, trigger, user-defined function, user-defined type, and all of these very, very cool goodies. And let's say I'm selecting a user-defined function, I click add, and let's see what happens. Check it out. There's a CS file added to my database project, and there's a C# code here all of a sudden. Whoa, what the hell? And I can develop C# stuff here, and then it will be, when it will be deployed, it will be deployed as a SQL CLR function. So I can have the source code of both my CLR objects and my SQL objects in the same source code, the same project, and it's very, very easy to manage. Very cool. Okay, next is I want to talk about something called the refactor tool. Let's imagine a scenario where I have a table. Let's take a table. Where do I have tables? Probably in the warehouse. That makes sense. Yeah, okay. So let's say I have a table, right? And let's say we have color name here, which is a text, okay? And one day someone decides, you know what, color name, that's a very bad name for whatever peculiar reason, and we decide to change it. Fine, okay. I go to our SQL Database Project and I change this name. What am I doing? Deleting this name. I want this to be known as color, not color name. Why? Because, okay. What happened? First of all, those with you with a keen eye may already notice that I have an error here highlighted, where the color, there is a dependency on the previously known as, on the column previously known as color name, because it's no longer color name, it's color now, but I change it only in one spot, right? I have all kinds of dependencies on it, even within the same script, but not necessarily only within the same script. If I open up the error list here, there's a whole bunch of reference errors that happened as a result of the change that I just did. Okay. And if, you know what, I could be very clever. I could do not this, but I could also, let's say, how do you do it? Edit, find and replace, replace in files, right? And then I'm saying, you know what? Wherever there is any mention of color name anywhere in the project, just change it to color, right? And I could do that. That could work. It will probably resolve all the build errors that I have in my project. But if I do this, what will happen upon the deployment day? Upon deployment day, what happens in deployment of an SSDT project? There's a DACPAC file, right? It has, let's say, the color column, right? At the source, the DACPAC source. At the target, I have color name. So DACPAC says, okay, I have a column that you don't have. You have a column that I don't have. That means I'm supposed to drop your column and I need to add my column as a new column. That's what SSDT thinks. Okay? Because you didn't tell it otherwise. So that is why we have a tool called the refactor tool. How do you use it? Like this, I think. Nah, not like this. Like this. Check it out. Let's say this is the file, right? The colors table. I can right-click on it and click on View in Object Explorer. This will highlight and select the file, the equivalent file here. It should be. I think it's not doing that right now because it's failing the build. Let's warehouse colors. It's this one, right? Yeah. Okay. But let's say I found it here specifically. This is important to remember, specifically in the SQL Server Object Explorer window, right? Once I find the column here, I can right-click on it, select refactor, and rename. Right-click, refactor, and rename. And I put in the new name, let's say color. Click OK. And it will show me a preview of all the changes. First of all, it would look for all the reference of the column anywhere within the project and show me all of the places in the project that would need to be changed in order to reflect this change that I wanted. I mean, I hope if everything works as expected. Come on. Okay, guys, looks like I think it is possible to refactor the table creation skill via quick actions and refactoring. Quick actions and refactoring, where is that? I'm not familiar with that. Quick actions and refactor. Anyways, looks like Visual Studio is not playing ball with me right now. The lords of the demo are not playing. Oh, okay. Fine. So as you can see, there's a preview here of all the places in the code that would need to be changed to reflect this change in order to maintain integrity, maintain reference integrity, and so on. So I click on apply, and I hope it will not take too long because we are very short on time. Okay, fine, it changed it. And now when I deploy the DACPack, it will be aware of this change that I just did because I did it properly. How? Because of this little thing. As a result of me using the refactor tool, this file showed up called something, the project name .refactor log. What is this little fellow? This is basically an XML file auditing the changes. Yes, I forgot to make a small sacrifice of code added to the demo goals. Yeah, I think I did, but perhaps it was insufficient. You don't know what happened before the recording started. Anyways, this refactor log is basically an XML file auditing the various changes done as a result of using the refactor tool, such as renaming a column. So there's all of the data, the information here necessary for SQL Server, for DACPack to know how to make the change. And also when it was done, there's also some kind of identifying key for it, for this specific change. And then during deployment, what happens is that this data, this information, once it is applied properly, when I say applied properly, I mean SP rename, using the store procedure that actually renames an object instead of dropping and adding new columns. This operation is then audited in a system table called, I think, __ refactor log or something like that. Okay. And then this way, DACPack can keep checking for that system table and know which refactoring operations were already applied and which were not. And then it will know to to make these changes as necessary. So that's very, very useful and very important to remember to use this tool when you're doing this kind of change, right? This kind of weird change. So this includes renaming columns and objects. It also includes changing the schema of an object. Okay. Let's say, let's find the table. We have this colors table in the warehouse schema, for example. I can right click on it, refactor, move to schema. Okay, and then I select a new schema for it. And for some reason, it doesn't let me right now, perhaps because it's system version or something, I don't know, or some kind of dependency. Maybe this one will be a better example. Oh, right, sorry, I need to select drop. Stupid, sorry. Yeah, I need to select it, the new schema from the dropdown. And then it's basically the same deal, right? I will be able to see the preview of the changes that will be applied, and this operation will be recorded in the refactor log and done properly instead of dropping and creating objects like a goddamn stone age person, right? So we have rename, we have move to schema. We can also do something that is called fully qualified names. For that example, let's add a store procedure. Doesn't matter at this point. This is just for the demo. And basically, let's go like this from warehouse.colors. Warehouse. Right. So as you can see, I use the wildcard here. Okay. And wait, there's another example that I wanted to do. Where do we have DBO? Yeah. Select one. Oh, sorry. Sample version. Okay. Sample version is this table. Right. It's a DBO table. Okay, so we have this procedure one here. Let's go right click, refactor. So we have these two options here, expand wildcards and fully qualified names, which is exactly the reason I did those two things I did. Let's look at it. Refactor, expand wildcards. I click on it, it automatically detects the wildcards that I have in the code and expands it to the actual literal list of relevant actual columns. This is very useful if we want to schema bind something to have it more qualified, to improve performance, compilations, whatever it is, standardization in general. This is very useful. And the second thing is fully qualified name. As you can see, I have sample version here. Let's see what happens. Check it out. It detected this thing and knew to add DBO dot this whatever. Okay, this is what's called to fully qualify object. You can also see at the top here, it also does the same for the columns at the top. And if I go like this, and let's say like this, refactor fully qualified name, check it out. He's a very smart fella. You see what it does? Even when I used an alias for the table, it knew to use that alias to fully qualify the columns. Josh asks, when you import your database, does it strip out all SQL comments? When I create a deck pack, it does. When you create a deck pack manually, yes, it does, because it does it using SMO, and SMO is limited in that regard, specifically in terms of comments. And that's also a good question, thank you. But no, actually, when you import a project, it does not get rid of the comments. No, they will be retained. If you do it like this, from right click and import and this thing, the comments will be retained. Prasad is asking, is there a way to format queries too? Not built in, but if you noticed all the mess that was going on my screen while I was writing the code, you can perhaps notice that I have an add-in installed here. This is Redgate SQL Prompt, and Redgate SQL Prompt also supports SSDT. Yeah, so there's also Redgate, Apex, SQL, and Devar. Thank you very much, Andrew. Yes, all of those are very good formatting tools, and they perfectly integrate with Visual Studio, as you can see in this example. Thank you, Andrew. So yeah, that was the refactor tool. Next, we have unit test and schema data compare and something called publish profiles. So I think I'm not going to have enough time, unfortunately, to go into unit tests. I'm just going to show you how to find it, right? How to find this feature. So similar to the refactor tool, you go to the SQL Server Object Explorer and right-click on some kind of programmability module, which could be a store procedure or a function or I think a trigger. I'm not sure about that one, but procedure and function definitely. So let's say I'm without looking. I don't know what I'm looking. Yeah, right-click on this, create unit test, and this will show you a dialog to select even more objects that you may want to include in your unit test. You will be able to determine whether the unit test will be with a C# backbone or VB backbone. You will be able to determine the name for the project, let's say wide world importance unit test, something. And then this is for the project. And you can also create multiple classes of unit testing within each project. And when you click OK, on OK, you would be able to configure a few additional things, such as the connections that will be done as part of executing the unit tests. I'm not going to go into too much in details about that. Okay, so this file, this C# file, you can ignore. Okay. Bless you. Oh man, the demo gods are not kind to me today. They are not kind. Okay, yeah, this is what I was looking for. Don't go away. No, I wanted this. Damn it. Oh, thank you. Wow, it actually isn't. That was weird. Okay, so this screen is what I was looking for. Okay, so once you have these unit tests created, you can see this screen, which you will see after double clicking on the class, the unit testing class, the CS file, sorry. And within each one, you could have multiple tests. Okay, each one is basically a T-SQL script. Okay, you have full control over what happens here. So you write the script, it's your responsibility, or maybe the QA person responsibility. And down here in the test conditions, you have all these kinds of very interesting test types that you can configure. Unfortunately, I did not have enough time to go any deeper into that, but you can feel free and have fun playing around with it. Right, so we have couple more tools here. If you go to Tools and SQL Server, you can see new query that I showed you previously as the query window, just like in SSMS. You can also have new data comparison and new schema comparison accordingly, as it's very similar to the equivalent of Redgate schema and data compare. You can select the source and the target and configurations of what kind of objects you want to include, what kind of objects you want to ignore, and all kinds of settings and stuff. I'm not going to go into it any deeper in that because it works almost the same as Redgate. You will have like a checklist of the differences and you'll be able to apply changes. Important thing to remember here is that both the source and the target could be either a live database that you can connect to or a project in your solution. So you can compare between two projects, you can compare between a project and a database, and you can compare between a database and a database, okay? Same thing goes for SQL Data Compare. Come on, thank you. Data Compare. Same idea, okay? Again, it's the same idea, just like in Redgate. Data Compare, you can select the connection, source, and target, and so on. Select what kind of comparison options you want to see, and then you will have checklists, like with the checkbox, select which changes to apply. Okay, I know we are short on time, so one last cute thing. Yeah, I'm going to answer that later. One last thing that I need to show you here is, if you recall previously, I showed you how to publish a project, right? What did I miss? What happened? There are builders in my project. Oh, okay. That's because I made the change in the colors table. I ruined it. Okay. Let's go to the other project. It was database 1, I think, right? Okay, so this is a more simple project, hopefully not ruined. Okay, so when I publish it, right-click and publish on the project, I can select the connection settings of the target database. I can also click on this advanced button here and see all kinds of various options of what to drop, what not to drop, what to ignore, what not to ignore, what kind of object types to exclude or ignore or include or whatever. Very, very configurable. I'm not going to go into details here. You can just play around with it and see the various options here. They're very, very useful. And the important thing I wanted to show here is that I can save these settings, including the target database and all of these options, whatever I am changing or not changing here. I simply click on either save profile as or create profile. Let's say create profile. Okay, and I'm closing this one because I want to show you what it did. It created this file, something.publish.xml. And first of all, as they implied, this is an XML file containing all of the settings that I mentioned. And once you have this kind of file, you can double click it. I double clicked it just now. And what it does is just it builds the project and loads the publish screen with all of the settings that I had changed already punched in. Okay. And this is very, very useful. You can also use these kind of publish profiles during deployments. So you can have perhaps different publish profiles per different environments, test, QA, staging, and so on. And this is very, very useful because it's very easy to manage sets of configurations and settings and things that otherwise would be very, very difficult to keep track of. So that's also very cool feature, and I strongly recommend using it. So far, okay, what kind of question we had? I saw there was a question previously. What was it? Prasad asks, have faced scenarios when using SQL Schema Compare on Visual Studio, clicking on General Script shows success, but doesn't work. Oh, no, yeah. And Kevin asked, did it just build or also publish with the profile? I didn't actually publish. I could publish. I just clicked on cancel. But yeah, it is possible to publish with the profile, obviously. Instead of deploying to a database, is it possible to deploy to a detailed script? Oh, God, that is a wonderful question. Thank you, Brett. That is a wonderful question. Yes, it is possible to generate a DDL script instead of publishing actually to a live database. We have this button here called Generate Script. What it does is basically generate this diff script or the publish script, which is basically the set of DDL changes that would be necessary to change the target database that I just selected as my target to match the source project or DACPAC file. And it looks something like this. There's nothing here because they're identical. Okay, fine. But yeah, if I had any changes done in my source project compared to the target database, yeah, I would be seeing these changes here. And this is a very useful tool to verify, especially if you feel not sure and you don't fully rely on this tool to do whatever it is you need to do automatically. This is very useful as verification, to show you what it is that the DACPAC file wants to do to your database, so that you'll be able to confirm it before actually applying it to your live database. How about a complete DDL script for a new database deployment, say if for some reason it is not possible to deploy from Visual Studio? Well, first of all, you don't have to have Visual Studio to deploy SSDT. Where is it? SSDT file. Oh, there it is. Because once you build a SSDT project, you have a DACPAC file, and this DACPAC file can be deployed using the SQL package utility.exe, right? I think that's its name, right? SQL package.exe. That's a command line utility that you can install, and you don't need Visual Studio for it. And it's a command line utility. You can use it to deploy DACPAC files, very similar to how like the GUI, except it's command line. You can also do it using PowerShell, using either the DBA tools. They have a couple of commandlets for it, or the DAC services, the DBA tools. That's their site, or something called DAC services. That's the name of the assembly, I think, in PowerShell that would be used for deploying DACPAC files as part of a PowerShell script. Right. What else? I think that's the essential. Any other questions? Oh, Prasad asks, on publishing failed, will it revert back changes? No, unless you go and do, where is it? This one. This. You can have as an option to back up your database before deployment automatically. Once you do, that backup is your basically way to go back. More questions. Let's say Kevin asked if this recording will be sent for use for later review. Obviously, yes, there will be a recording. And also says I would create a publish file, then hand over to QA tester, and they would test or verify, then hand over for actual deploy to prod. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's possible to use the general script for this purpose to either for you to review it or hand it over to a QA person. Pre and post script, some templates or ideas. I would recommend watching the fourth session, right? The session number 4, this one. I talk about post and pre-deployment scripts here in this context. Okay, so I recommend watching the fourth part. Basically, it's the next part in this series for all kinds of methods to troubleshoot common SSDT errors and issues and edge cases. That includes also very interesting usages of pre and post deployment scripts. Any more questions? I missed previous lessons. Can you send out a link or reference on how to go see? Yeah, okay. So you must have missed the beginning of the session. So I'll show it again. I have a website. Hello. It is eitanblumin.com. This is my website. You can thank you. You can go to presentations and CI and CD with SSDT. You will see all of the series here, not necessarily in the right order, but they are all here. As of today, one, 2, 3, and 4. Those are the parts I have. Today's session is part 3. That's why what I was talking about today. The next part is part 4. Previously, parts of 1 and 2. So yeah, you can find it here, enter into any of these pages. There are links to recordings and so on. Brett asks, does SSDT support initial table data deployment? Yes. Yes, it does, but not exactly natively. There is actually an implementation of it in the Wide World Importers solution. Where it is, it's over here. Basically, the idea is post-deployment scripts. Open one of these as an example. This is an example from Microsoft. What they do here is just an insert command into the table. But basically, these post-deployment scripts in general, they can do whatever, right? This is a free-form script. It does not go through build or any reference checks or whatever. It is only executed during runtime, like in real time during the actual deployment. Okay. So yeah, post-deployment scripts are very useful for this purpose. You can also do it like this. Let's say SQL. Yeah, this one. As you can see, if you have a post-deployment script, and when I say post-deployment script, is one script where in its properties you have the build action called post-deploy. You can only have one of these per project, but this one can refer to other additional files. So you can have multiple in quotes post-deployment scripts, but there's only one like main post-deployment script that is actually marked as a post-deployment script. And if you can see here, this one is marked as post-deploy, but the others have build action none. Okay. This is very important to do. If you don't do this, then the Visual Studio will try to compile it as part of your project, and it will fail because this thing is not an actual object. There is no create here, so it will fail. But if you set none as the build action, then you can also refer to it from your actual post-deployment script, and it's called sort of like an include or sort of thing. Yeah, okay. Alberto asks, some experience with AZ Data Studio for SQL DevOps. Yeah, it's very similar, but it doesn't have all of the capabilities that I showed you here. It's more lean, right? It doesn't have all of the features that I showed. It's mostly for just the development part, right? The simple development part. I don't think it has, at least not built in, the comparison features, and I don't think it has the whatever it is called, the thing that runs in the background to check your syntax in real time. And in general, it's less robust, I guess you could say. But if your needs are simple enough, that then AZ Data Studio could be quite good enough for it. Yeah, there's an extension for it for SQL Database Project you can install, and it's pretty good. Yeah. IntelliSense. What's the question, Kevin? About IntelliSense? There is IntelliSense if you're asking. I mean, within SSDT there is IntelliSense, like internally consistent IntelliSense. As you may have noticed, I have Redgate SQL prompt installed, so that's the one that took over the IntelliSense in my case. But yeah, there is also internal built-in IntelliSense if you don't have such a tool installed. I hope that answers the question, that because you just said the word intelligence, so I guessed what you were asking.
I'm going to go with the fact that I answered it, so it's all good.
Okay, fine.
Thank you so much. This
I
has
have
been.
a couple. Can I have like a couple last slides?
Go for it.
Okay, just a few. Copilot instead of intelligence. I don't know. Sorry, I don't have an answer for that. Okay, just in a few words, there are some abnormal deployment use cases which are too complicated. Granted, they are too complicated for SSDT. For example, perhaps you want to normalize a table. In order to do something like that, normalize a table, like take a text column and then do a distinct, select distinct into a new table, and then change the text column with an integer column and connect foreign keys and all of that big mess. In order to do that, like using the built-in tooling in SSDT, that is a nightmare. It's a nightmare to do that. Okay, it's not impossible. It's a nightmare to do it. And there are all kinds of abnormal edge cases that I could think of, but the message that I want to tell you is that you don't always have to use SSDT for deployment. Sometimes the effort required to circumvent the limitations of SSDT for all kinds of abnormal edge cases, it's not worth the effort. You might as well just manually do the change, like write the migration script manually and apply it in production, and then implement the desired end state in your SSDT project so that both the production and your project have the same state. Okay. Once you do that, and you have, like, let's say, an automated CI/CD pipeline that deploys your DAC to production, then nothing will happen because they already have the same state. And the deployment will recognize that, the SQL package utility, and nothing will happen. It will have no effect. So take that into consideration when you feel that in order to implement some kind of edge case, you need to work way, way too hard. Okay. And there are additional resources that I recommend. For example, Introduction to GitHub for DBAs by Brent Ozer, the Azure DevOps Duet by Kevin Chang and Sandra Studd, and the Sandra Studd's repository, open source repository on GitHub. This one, Zero Downtime Database Deployments by Alex Yates. I strongly recommend this specific session. It's very, very useful to learn about all kinds of methodologies, deployment methodologies for databases, to have zero downtime. Okay, actual zero downtime. It's very useful, very informative. I strongly recommend it. And also, there's all kinds of documentation on Microsoft Learn, specifically for SSDT, and the project-oriented offline database development methodology. And more resources are created every day. There are all kinds of videos and sessions available, not just in this meetup, but in all kinds of platforms. And yeah, that's about it. Any more questions? Any more notes, comments, and gift baskets? I don't know.
Somehow I obviously missed the gift basket.
I mean, it's okay. I can do without a gift basket. It's okay.
This time. Just this time.
Just this time. Yeah, just this time.
All right. Thank you. This has been very informative. Hopefully everyone's learned a few things about SSDT, what you can do with it, what you can't, which is sometimes more important. So
Yeah.
all good. All good, my friends. So with that, let's make sure to thank Eden for all of his good work. Great presentation. All kinds of goodness there. And remember to join us back at Cloud Data Driven next week when Javier Velgas is going to talk about Introduction to SQL Server 2022. Thank you, friends, so much. It has been wonderful. So we'll see y'all next time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.